Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Once upon a time, there lived two sisters who led completely different lives. Their names were T and E, and people often wondered if they were truly blood sisters. T, the older sister, was a school dropout who married a man 20 years older than herself. Her younger sister, E, was well-educated and worked in a multinational corporation. The sisters were not particularly close, as T often appeared distant and indifferent toward her younger sister. One day, E returned home to visit their parents. She met T in the house and decided to share her exciting news. "I'm getting married," she said with a bright smile on her face. Their parents leaped for joy, hugging and congratulating her on the news. In a calm but joyful voice, E continued, revealing to them that she was also pregnant. The room fell silent as the joy that once filled it disappeared. E sat there confused, wondering why her parents were suddenly quiet. After what felt like forever, her father spoke up and asked her to bring the man who had shown interest in marrying her. T could not hold back her anger. She stood up and stared at their parents, asking if they were going to sit back and watch this happen. "I knew it," T said as she clenched her fists, her voice trembling with bitterness. She bared her mind to everyone present. T accused E of trying to mock her childlessness. "I knew you would stop at nothing to rub my predicament in my face. You got pregnant just to mock me," she said to E, who stood there frozen and unable to speak. Her smile faded as she stared at her sister in disbelief. "T, how could you even think that?" E asked softly, trying to calm her sister down. Their parents stood there confused, unsure of how to calm the brewing storm between their daughters. But T had not finished speaking her mind. "All my life, I've been the one everyone hated, the one everyone whispered about behind closed doors. And now you perfect, successful E, have come to mock my pain. You've taken everything from me, and now you want to ridicule my situation." Ye's eyes filled with tears as she stepped closer to her sister. "T, I have never, ever tried to compete with you. I have never wished you harm for even one day in my life. I only came here to share my joy with my family, but it all fell apart," E said, tears pouring down her cheeks as she stormed out of the house, leaving behind an awkward silence that pierced everyone's hearts. E never understood why her sister T hated her so much. She sat there confused, watching as her mother spoke to T on the phone. "Tell her to abort that pregnancy if she ever wants peace in this family," T said to their mother before hanging up. E stood frozen as she overheard her sister's demands. The joy of her pregnancy and upcoming marriage was overshadowed by her sister's bitterness. E tried to shake off the pain, telling herself that T was simply hurting and didn't mean her words. But deep down, E knew T was serious. Their parents decided to call a family meeting to address the issues between the sisters, but T refused to attend. E, being loving and kind, decided to pay her sister a visit at home. She knocked on T's door repeatedly, but T refused to let her in. Determined to have a word with her sister, E stood outside and sang her sister's favorite childhood song, believing it would change T's heart. However, her plan did not work. T angrily walked out of the house and poured a bucket of soapy water over her. "Never come to my house again. You're dead to me," T said as she banged the door shut in Ye's face. Drenched in soapy water, E turned and walked away as neighbors peeked through their windows, whispering among themselves. T had spent years building walls around herself, shutting E out completely. To her, E was a symbol of everything she had lost: opportunities, affection, and now, even the dream of motherhood. T believed their parents loved E more, praised her more, and overlooked T's struggles. She convinced herself that E was to blame for all her misfortunes. E, heartbroken and unable to contain her tears, returned home and confided in her fiancé, who advised her to stay away from T for now. "How can your sister suggest you abort your baby? Is it because she has no child of her own?" he asked as E burst into tears. Weeks passed, and wedding preparations began. He tried several times to reach out to T, But her sister never picked up her calls or responded to her messages. Determined, E decided to deliver her wedding invitation in person. She slid the card under Ti's door with a note apologizing for anything she might have done wrong. He stood outside the door for a moment, hoping for any sign of acknowledgement, but the silence remained unbroken. With a heavy heart, E turned and walked away, leaving her apology on the other side of the door. She returned home, hopeful that things might still change. Things would change. The day of their wedding finally arrived, and E looked stunning in her wedding dress. Her face was glowing with happiness despite the sadness that lingered in her eyes. E left one seat empty in the front row, hoping until the very last moment that T would walk through the door and be part of their special day. But as expected, her sister T never showed up. T was seated in her living room, watching a television program while her sister's wedding was ongoing. She could not bring herself to attend the wedding, knowing that her sister was pregnant. T could feel the bitterness in her heart. She couldn't help but blame her younger sister for all the things she had endured in life. Her in-laws made her life a living hell. They blamed T for her childlessness and mocked her at every given opportunity. Whenever someone in the family announced a pregnancy, Ti's mother-in-law would make mocking remarks at her. She constantly compared T to her co-wives, who were educated, had children, and seemed to bring pride to the family. The comparisons were relentless, with her mother-in-law often asking why she chose to be useless. Whenever there was an important family celebration, T was either given menial tasks in the background or outrightly excluded. She often sat at home alone while her husband and his family celebrated without her. On one occasion, during a family party, her sister-in-law openly mocked her for not being able to conceive. "Maybe you should try some herbal remedies," she said loudly, causing others to laugh while T stood frozen with embarrassment. Whenever T visited her in-laws, they treated her like a maid. She was expected to cook, clean, and serve everyone without rest while her sisters-in-law relaxed and enjoyed themselves. Even her husband began to neglect her feelings, ignoring how much his family despised and ridiculed her. One morning, T received a text from her sister informing her that she was at the hospital. Her baby was coming, and E wished for T to be there. "I am naming her after you, Tia," the message read. E told her sister how much she loved her. T sat with the message in her hand, unable to believe her sister planned to name her baby after her. "What nonsense is this?" she said to herself angrily. She got dressed and headed to the hospital. T saw this as the height of mockery. She decided to confront E and tell her not to name the child after her. She got into her car and drove an hour to the hospital. When she arrived, she met her mother and brother-in-law in tears. Her sister E had just passed, leaving her newborn daughter and husband behind. T froze as the words sank in. Her mother's sobs echoed in her ears, and her brother-in-law sat on a hospital bench with his face buried in his hands. The anger that had fueled her journey to the hospital dissolved into cold ashes. "No, it can't be," T whispered, clutching her chest as though trying to hold her heart together. She stood there, shaking as her mother approached. "She loved you. She loved you so much. Even in her final moments, she asked for you," her mother said with tears in her eyes. Ti's body shook as guilt pierced her soul. All the anger, resentment, and walls she had built around herself crumbled like a fragile sandcastle against an unyielding tide. "She wanted to name her baby after you, T," her mother continued through her tears. "She said it was her way of showing you how much she loved you despite everything that had happened." The weight of those words was unbearable. T had spent so long resenting her sister, believing she had stolen her happiness, that she never paused to see the love her sister had for her. And now, she stood there, wishing she had acted differently. But it was already too late. The door to Yi's hospital room was slightly ajar. T walked in to see her sister's lifeless body lying on the hospital bed, her face serene as though she had simply fallen asleep. Her newborn baby lay in the corner, asleep. T approached them with shaking hands. T looked down at the child, whose name was also Tia. Her heart broke into 1,000 pieces as she felt the weight of her sister's love. "I'm so sorry," T whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't see it. I didn't realize how much she loved me. I let my pain blind me, and now you're gone." T broke down in tears as a nurse gently escorted her out of the hospital room. Her mother stood at the door, silently watching the scene. She had never seen T so vulnerable in her life and knew that she had contributed to her pain. She approached T and apologized for all the horrible things she had done to her. T stood there, broken, as she felt the whole world collapse around her. Everyone saw her as a bitter woman, not knowing that beneath her bitterness was a story. It all began so many years ago when T fell in love with a young man named Abra. He was kind, hardworking, and full of dreams. Their love was pure, and despite their financial struggles, they believed they could build a life together. When he found out that she was pregnant, she was terrified but hopeful. She thought Abra would marry her, and they would start a family together. But when she shared the news with her parents, everything began to go south. "You can't disgrace this family, T. You will not have a child out of wedlock," her father said. Her mother cried bitterly, lamenting how the family name would be dragged through the mud. They forced her to have an abortion, telling her it was for her own good. Abra, devastated by the news, gathered the courage to formally ask for Ti's hand in marriage. But her parents rejected him outright because of his state of origin. "We can't let our daughter marry someone from there," her father said coldly as he chased Abra away, warning him never to step foot in their home again. Abra left heartbroken, and Ti's world shattered before her eyes. Out of desperation, T planned to run away with Abra. They planned to start over somewhere far away where no one knew them. But young E, who was only 10 at the time, overheard her sister's plans and innocently told their parents, thinking she was protecting T from doing something wrong. That night, T was beaten mercilessly. Her father's belt left deep marks on her skin, and her mother's words cut even deeper than the scars. "You are a disgrace to this family," her mother said as she locked T in her room for days. Abra eventually left the city, and T never saw him again. Her mother took her to have an abortion, not caring about the consequences. T lost her will to continue her studies. She dropped out of school and withdrew from the entire world. Her parents, seeing that she had decided not to further her education, introduced her to Chief Adewale, a man who was 20 years older than T. He was a wealthy man who had taken an interest in her and wanted to marry her. Ti's parents convinced her to marry him, saying that doing so would bring their family out of poverty. Desperate for acceptance, T agreed. But her marriage was loveless. Chief Adewale was distant, and the years passed with no sign of children. The abortion she was forced to have had taken away her ability to conceive. Her husband grew colder over time, and his family treated her like a burden. T lived with the crushing guilt of her past and the emptiness of her present. Every smile on Yi's face reminded T of the life she could have had, the love, the joy, the freedom to make her own choices. She saw E as the golden child, the one who escaped their parents' harsh control and got to live the life of her dreams. In Ti's eyes, it wasn't fair. She saw Yi's success, happiness, and pregnancy as a deliberate reminder of everything she had lost. So, she poured her frustration onto E, the one person who had loved her unconditionally. He had become a scapegoat for all the pain, regret, and unhealed wounds that T had endured. But standing there, staring at her sister's lifeless body, T realized the heavy weight of her choices and misplaced anger. She decided to let it all go, knowing the damage had already been done. She apologized to Yi's husband for how badly she had treated them. T narrated the whole story to him, tears pouring down her face as she confessed every detail: the abortion, the rejection of Abra, her forced marriage to Chief Adewale, and the deep scars that had shaped her bitterness. Yi's husband listened intently, his eyes softening as he saw the shattered woman before him. "T," he said gently, "I forgive you. E loved you so much, and she would want you to find peace." T broke down in tears, feeling a flicker of relief in his forgiveness. She devoted herself to caring for her niece, Tia. In those quiet moments, as she held the baby in her arms, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in years: love. Pure, undiluted love. However, life wasn't done testing T. Chief Adewale, who had long grown tired of her presence, married another woman, a younger, more vibrant bride chosen by his family. One fateful afternoon, T returned home to find her belongings packed in bags on the doorstep. "You are no longer welcome here," her husband said coldly, without meeting her eyes. His new wife stood in the background, smirking. His family had ensured that every legal document was in his favor. T had no claim to anything. Not the house, not the wealth, and certainly not his loyalty. Broken and humiliated, T returned to her parents' home with only a small bag of clothes. Her mother welcomed her silently, guilt etched on her face, while her father avoided her gaze entirely. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of her failures pressed heavily on her. Desperate to escape her thoughts, T decided to visit her niece, hoping the baby's smile might bring her some comfort. When she arrived at Yi's husband's house, she knocked hesitantly, clutching a small teddy bear in her hand. The door opened and there stood a tall man, his presence commanding yet warm. "T," he said in disbelief. T froze, staring at the familiar face. "Abra," she whispered. It was him, her Abra. His hair was shorter, streaked with faint signs of gray, but his deep eyes were still as kind as she remembered. "I didn't know you would be here," T stammered. Abra smiled faintly. "I came to visit my cousin after I returned from abroad. I had no idea his wife was your sister, or that you were the same T I once loved." The air between them cracked with unspoken words, years of pain and regret hanging heavily in the silence. "Please, come in," Abra said softly. Inside, little Tia was sleeping peacefully in her crib. Abra glanced at her and smiled. "She looks just like it. She's beautiful." T felt tears prick her eyes. They sat down in the living room, and for the first time in decades, T shared everything with Abra: the pain, the guilt, the years of isolation, and bitterness. Abra listened, his eyes filled with compassion. "T," he said after a long pause, "you were failed by so many people, but it's not too late to rewrite your story." T nodded as tears streamed down her face. Abra had spent his years focused on his work, so he never had time for women. He was now a successful medical doctor, and T could not believe how life had smiled on him. Over the next few weeks, Abra and T began to rebuild their connection. He visited often, spending time with little Tia and sharing stories with T. Slowly, the walls T had built around herself began to crumble, and for the first time in years, she felt truly seen and understood. Abra was gentle, patient, and kind, never rushing T to confront emotions she wasn't ready for. His presence brought a quiet calm to her chaotic world. One evening, as they sat on the couch, Abra asked T if she remembered when they used to sit under the mango tree by her house, talking about their dreams. T smiled faintly, her gaze distant. "Yes. You always said you wanted to become a doctor, and I wanted to become a lawyer." Abra looked at her intently. "You deserve happiness, T. You've been carrying this pain for so long, and it's time to let it go. We can't change the past, but we can choose what happens next." T looked at him, her eyes glistening with tears. "Abra, I don't know if I can. I'm so broken. I've made so many mistakes." Abra gently took her hand. "We are all broken in some way, but sometimes the cracks are what let the light in." As months passed, T gradually opened herself up to healing. She focused on caring for her niece, Tia, showering her with all the love she had in her heart. Abra was always there, offering support, encouragement, and warmth. One evening, Abra invited T to his home. It was a quiet evening, and Abra had taken the time to prepare dinner. T was delighted. They sat and ate as Abra reminded T of all the beautiful times they had in the past. T couldn't help but giggle at the stories that brought back so many memories. Abra then handed a small box to her and watched her open it with a smile. "T, I have loved you since we were young. Despite everything that happened, that love never died. I know we can't erase the past, but we can build a new future together. Will you let me love you? Will you let me stand by your side and help you heal?" Ti's hands trembled as she opened the box to find a ring. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time in years, T felt something warm and pure. "Yes, Abra," she whispered through her tears. Abra screamed out in excitement. T and Abra took their time building their life together. They didn't rush into marriage but instead focused on healing and creating beautiful memories. T gradually reconciled with her parents. Her mother, racked with guilt, worked hard to make amends, while her father, though slower to express regret, began to show subtle signs of remorse through his actions. Chief Adewale, on the other hand, spiraled into financial troubles as his new wife squandered his wealth and eloped with her lover. Karma, it seemed, had found its way back to him. But T no longer carried hatred or bitterness in her heart. She had found peace in the love she shared with Abra and the joy that came with it. They got married, and T found out months later that she was pregnant. Abra had put her on a fertility treatment that worked, and T was now carrying her own child. The news came as a miracle, one that brought tears of joy to Ti's eyes. She clutched the pregnancy test tightly, her hands trembling as she whispered heartfelt thanks to God. Abra was also delighted. He pulled her into his arms, and they held each other tightly, their tears mixing with laughter. "This child is our blessing, T," Abra said softly. "A fresh start. A sign that love can heal even the deepest wounds." The months that followed were filled with laughter. T finally gave birth to twin babies. Her years of suffering finally ended as she lived the remainder of her life in joy. Her husband and children filled the void she never knew could be filled. Her parents learned the bitter lesson never to sacrifice their children's happiness for societal approval. Ti's life was shaped by her parents' decisions, driven by societal expectations and fear of shame. Their insistence on aborting her pregnancy and rejecting the man she loved led to years of bitterness, regret, and suffering. Therefore, this story teaches us that parental decisions driven by societal pressure and fear of shame can have devastating consequences on their children's lives. It highlights the importance of allowing children to make choices rooted in love and happiness rather than societal expectations. Bitterness and unresolved trauma can destroy relationships and prevent healing, while forgiveness, unconditional love, and self-reflection are powerful tools for breaking free from cycles of pain. The story also emphasizes that it's never too late for redemption, healing, and second chances, and that love, both romantic and familial, has the power to restore even the most broken hearts. Finally, it serves as a reminder that true happiness comes from embracing love, letting go of resentment, and choosing to build a future free from the chains of the past. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.